Hey everybody, this is Tim Guy here. Going to talk a little bit about my data analysis that I did. So just to give a little bit of background. This is a Algebra 2 test that I actually gave on the Friday when this unit went up, when this module went up for us to work through. So kind of lucky I got to grade this test and kind of go through and take a look at some data and do some analysis there. Another thing that I did to try to simulate a little bit about how my data is going to go when I'm doing my actual project was I give all the students a practice test beforehand, every test that we do, and then we go over that practice test, but I always have them kind of write the correct answers to study with on the side so I can see what their original responses were. So I actually took the time to go through and grade those as well to try to simulate some of that pre-test, post-test that I'm going to be doing with my actual research. Now, it makes a little bit less sense because there was no intervention in between. So, as you're going to see, most of the scores were pretty similar. Obviously, some of them went up because the kids studied with it. And you'll see one kid that I think did not try it all on their practice tests and kind of winged it on the actual test. So we'll see that a little bit too. But it just kind of gives some going through some of the motions of what's going to be happening when I do my actual project. Okay, sorry. Slight technical difficulty. So picking up where I was talking about, let's take a look at some of the raw data that I collected here. So as you can see, I gave each student kind of a number ID to keep track of them, and I just kind of went across on the chart here to give them their score. So in the green column are their raw test scores. The test was out of 70, so this is how many points they scored. And then over here with the percentage, this is the actual percent that they got on the test. And this is what I kind of used for all my other data, was comparing the percents together. I used Google Sheets to kind of organize this for me and do some of the calculations. You also use Excel or whatever. And then this is the pre-test score and percentage, and then the difference is what I put over here, basically from the pre-test to the post-test. In this case, the practice test to the actual test, what the kind of the difference in the score was, how much they improved, basically. And so you can see the scores were all, for the most part, pretty good. There was a couple low scores in there, but this is a high achieving class, so that's kind of what I would expect from them. And if you look at the difference, most students score within a point or two of where they scored on their actual test, so it's a pretty good predictor. There was that kid I talked about in the beginning, so if you look at number 9 right here, they improved by 33 percentage points. They got a 53% on the practice test and got an 86% on the post test. Now, I do not grade the practice test. They get a completion grade for it, so it's not something that they have to do really well on to get a good grade. It's more as a study tool for them. But I'll definitely be having a conversation with a student now that I went and looked at it in terms of, hey, what is the point of this? Don't you want to put effort on it to maybe improve? This student got a B on their test, but maybe they could have gotten an A if they really tried on that practice test. I don't know. So that's the raw data that I kind of looked through. And then really the heart of this unit, I think, and what we've been doing is kind of talking about some of the ways to analyze this and look at this data in general. And so I went ahead and I found the mean, median, mode, all the different central tendencies of the post-test and the pre-test, and then the standard deviation. And what's really interesting is that on the actual test, my mean, my median, my mode were all exactly the same. And that's pretty cool. And an 86 was the mean. That's usually the one I go with unless there are outliers. And the fact that if you look at this, the mean and median are really close to each other means that outliers probably did not have a great effect on my outcome here, my final scores. And then the mode I always think is not as useful unless there's a whole bunch of kids got 100%. Maybe there's something weird going on, but that was not the case here. And then the standard deviation, obviously, I think is something that's really important to look at. Just as an anecdote, I know my mom taught elementary school for a really long time, and her district one year brought in a standardized test that they wanted to use to help predict student scores on the PSSA. And I don't remember the exact numbers, but let's say that the test was out of 40. And they had the first time they got the results back, the mean score was a 22, which wasn't great. But then the standard deviation was 10. And my mom was saying, wait, hold on, that's a really big standard deviation for a score out of 40. you're telling me that this is the giant wide range. Like, it's really hard. This is not really good data. There's obviously something going on with this test that we can't use. And none of her administrators had any idea what she was talking about. And I think that it really, those of us who are math teachers, even if you're not a math teacher, just if you're familiar with the standard deviation, that is a really essential thing to have an understanding of and really look at, and really kind of tells you about the quality of the test you're giving or just the student scores in general. My standard deviation here actually seems pretty okay for what we're looking at in terms of test scores. A majority of my students, just to kind of put in the most simplest terms, a majority of my students would have scored between about 78 to a 92. And in the book, it said sometimes it's really good to think about that in terms of how successful were your students in terms of that score. And I think with a lot of groups, that's a really great score, anywhere between a 78 to a 92. Or I guess it'd be 8 points. It actually be a 94. Those would be really awesome scores you'd be really, really happy with. I will say that with this group, they are our top math students in the school. And this actually, I went back and looked at my test scores from last year, and the mean on that one I had written down from last year was like an 89. And I did not do the standard deviation on that, but the scores looked like they were a little bit closer to that. So this actually was a little bit worse than previous years that I've taught this content. And because they're the highest kids, it's a little more concerning that I have some kids floating in the C range. But if you actually went and looked at the raw data, if I go back, if my computer lets me do it, yeah, if I go back and look at the raw data, there really were not that many students who scored below. There were a couple kids like number 13 and number 7 that I would say were a little bit outliers here, that may have affected that a little bit, but obviously something that I would want to look at and definitely meet with those kids and make sure that we can figure stuff out for the next chapter. In terms of analyzing all this data, I think this is a really good look at sort of the quantitative side of things and how I'm going to be approaching that when I go to do my research here during this course. I will say that reading through the book and reading about all the different things about the qualitative data, it sounds really interesting. A lot of stuff that I'm going to be doing will have a qualitative component to it. I'm interested in looking at student feelings and attitudes towards the flipped classroom and kind of using that as part of my data. And that's definitely going to involve either some coding with some surveys I give out, or just analyzing some responses and doing qualitative data. Unfortunately, it was a little hard to kind of get some data for this to kind of analyze. Like we didn't have school on Monday, and then today I wasn't going to go in and be like, "Hey, fill out this survey on something random for me." So that's something that I'll definitely be kind of talking to Ali about and kind of approaching at the time. But definitely getting some practice here, looking at the quantitative data and how to analyze it and what to look for and what to notice. I think has been really important. So thank you for watching, and hope that your data goes just as well as mine.